One of my favorite things about painting flowers in oil into my sketchbook is the opportunity to play with colors and techniques in a low-stakes environment. Painting on paper with oil is not only doable, but incredibly fun, and in this video, I'll be walking you through how to paint this peony spread from start to finish. I've also included some resources for artists below, including my free ebooks and reference photos. Let's get started. To begin, let's turn to a new spread. I'm using the Stillman & Birns Zeta series, which I highly recommend. After clipping the pages, we'll start by adding in a rough sketch of the peonies. I love painting peonies, but even with years of experience, I still find that it's easy to get lost in all of the overlapping petals. The important thing to remember is that no one is going to be comparing your painting side by side to your reference photo, so it's okay if a petal or two are off. After we've put all the petals in, I'm going to use a template to add faint lines into the background with a pencil. I do this because I cannot write in a straight line for the life of me, so this helps me keep my writing evenly spaced and straight. Then I'm going to go over my drawing of the peonies with black ballpoint pen. I'm using a Zebra F301 for this, which is my favorite pen and completely waterproof. While we're doing that, I'd also like to give credit where it's due. I learned many of the techniques you're seeing in this video from artist Dina Brodsky, who openly shares her methods on Instagram and through her courses, encouraging everyone to try them and start a sketchbook habit. You should definitely go check her out on Instagram if you're not following her already. Now it's time to add some writing, which for me is mostly notes about the plant, but you can journal if you'd prefer. With the drawing and writing in place, it's time to add the ink. I'm going to start with a thin layer of Sennelier acrylic ink in the color sepia and just splatter and wash that all over. For the main color, I mixed together Quinacridone magenta, deep violet, and transparent burnt umber. We're going to go ahead and apply that all over the pages, but I'm going to avoid the area with the flower bud. I'm not going to lie, keeping the ink away from the flower stem did not turn out the way I'd hoped. I was picturing more of a soft gradient, and that's not what I got. It also bled through on the underside of this page, which I'll show you later in the video. The good news is that once the flowers were added in, this background wound up looking so much better, which you'll see as the video progresses. Next, we have to seal the pages. For all previous spreads in this book, I used a spray shellac, but this time I decided to try acrylic matte medium. When you're painting in oil on paper, you need something to prevent the oil from penetrating the fibers of the page. I did 2 coats of this just to be safe. Allow each coat to dry for at least a few hours, and then we can begin to paint. For this spread, I decided to limit my palette to just 4 colors and white, which were Cadmium Yellow Deep, Quinacridone Red, Ultramarine Blue, and Burnt Umber. I was picturing a rich tone-on-tone composition, so I drew from the same colors that I used for the background to make the flowers feel like they were in harmony with the paper. When I'm working alla prima in oil, which means at first attempt or wet and wet, I'll always try to go from darkest to lightest. I find lighter colors will contaminate everything, so I'll add in all the dark undersections first before slowly transitioning to lighter. Since this is just a sketchbook and not a final painting, this is where you experiment with color and technique. For this first flower, I lowered the saturation and used soft tones instead of vibrant colors. For the next flower, I decided to play with contrast. I made the dark colors even darker and dialed up the saturation, adding in rich oranges, burgundies, and plums. At this stage, I was having mixed feelings about my first flower since I really preferred the more saturated look, so I decided to tie it in by adding a little of the pinks on my brush onto the outer petals of the first peony. This made it look like light was bouncing off of the second peony. Finally, I added in some stamens alla prima, blending them directly into the dark layer underneath. While I had those colors out, I decided to head back into the first peony and make some changes. That paint was already dry, so I lightly scuffed on some brighter highlights and deeper shadows. I decided to not go any more saturated with more color, since I didn't want the two flowers to compete. This is actually a good lesson to internalize. Whether it's a landscape, a still life, or a flower study, if each element is trying to catch your attention, the results will feel a little chaotic. Since the top flower was muted and the bottom flower was intense, I decided to split the difference and aim for the middle ground with my next flower, adding in classic Coral Charm peony coloration. In the spirit of not having too many competing elements, I made the next peony darker and pinker to provide some variation in colors across the spread, and also to make sure it didn't draw too much attention to itself. Here is where you can really see the overall composition coming to life, and the benefit of switching colors up from flower to flower. I wanted the next flower to be even more eye-catching since it's near the center of the book and also the largest in the composition. To keep this as the focus of the piece, I made the darks darker, the lights lighter, and kept the colors nice and warm. To finish this grouping off, I added the final peony but made it darker and warmer to keep it as a supporting player but not the star of the show. I also decided at this point that I was not going to add in the foliage even though it was in the drawing. I thought that the green leaves would compete with the flowers, work against the color harmony, and just make the spread look messy. However, I'm curious as to what you think, so feel free to let me know in the comments. When I pictured this spread, I imagined an unopened bud on a stem balancing out the main cluster of peonies. That's where I got the idea to leave a halo around the stem. Otherwise, I didn't think it would pop enough from the page. As you can see, this actually turned out okay, especially once we added in the paint and brought the stem to life. But there is one other thing I wanted to show you in case you try these techniques for yourself. Because I did 2 layers of ink at the beginning, it did actually bleed through on the other side of the page. However, if this happens to you, please don't panic. As long as you're using acrylic ink on the other side, it won't be noticeable, and you can always paint something on top of it to hide it if it is. Again, this is just a sketchbook, so even though I'm trying to make my entries as pretty as possible, I'm not going to be sweating the small stuff. Before moving on to the final step, what you're watching here is shadows being added under the flowers to help them pop from the page. I used a Q-tip to soften the edges and reduce any shadows that went on too heavy. To finish, I had to choose between 2 gold inks to add in some metallic writing. I wound up going with Dr. Martin's Iridescent Copperplate Gold after trying both in a testing book. I thought that the Liquitex Gold looked a little too yellow. However, I must say, I'm not sure if I love the final result. This gold is much softer and more subtle, which is what I was going for, but maybe a little too subtle. But even though my writing's not perfect and the color isn't quite what I thought, it added that extra little glam to the piece, which I love. And with that, this oil on paper peony spread is complete. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions at all, leave me a comment. You can check out my other sketchbook tutorials here on this playlist or my floral tutorials on this playlist. Don't forget your free ebooks and happy painting!